Welcome. I'm Michael Hampton. Today we're going to be talking about head drawing and construction. Specifically, we're going to talk about the basic setup. So I go through about 4 steps to initiate the basic lay-in, or we could call this even the gesture of a head drawing. And this is going to cover just about every position that I could potentially see or set a head in. What I've included to the right is a couple of skulls that are just kind of loosely rendered or drawn in there. And those are going to be reference points for now. So we're going to use those as opportunities or as models from which I can give you a sense for how I'll be abstracting, weird word, but how I'll be simplifying those big ideas into manageable pieces to begin or to initiate what it is that we'll be doing for our 4 steps. So let's consider this to be our gesture or our setup, and along the way I'll give you some options. I'm not super dogmatic with an approach to drawing. I think it's good to have a lot of flexibility or opportunity to make changes. So step 1 for me is always how I'm thinking about or dealing with the big issue of the cranial mass. So cranial mass is for our head about 2/3. The reason I've kept it kind of vague there in terms of its naming, not human cranial mass, is I draw the same for animal, except in an animal skull or head, I would just reposition and resize these shapes. First, the easiest way maybe to manage or get a sense for how that big skull might lay in is just a basic sphere. So if we look over at our skull, so let's say that's roughly 2/3 in relationship to the whole of the head. So what is let's say the positive and the negative of using a sphere? The positive is that it's a little bit easier to draw with. The negative or the con might be that it's not very exact in terms of its representation with the human skull. So the human skull would be, or our cranial mass would be a bit more of an egg shape. And so we can lay that in. Let's look at that specifically from above so that you get a sense for maybe what that shape would look like. If I were to take this kind of front view here and bring it to bird's eye, what we would see is much more tapered, narrowed, and flat forehead. And then as we progressively get back towards the base of the skull, we would find that the widest part of the skull would be towards that end or towards that back portion. This would be more accurate, and we could take this and use it to translate our initial shape for the cranial mass into something more appropriate or something a little bit more reflective of an egg. So if we were to start that way, you could also begin your head drawings as an egg. And so here I'm thinking about maybe this would be a 3/4 view. This ellipse right here, what I'm thinking about that as being is the same as the width for that, we'll call it the proximal ridge of the skull, or that front plane of the forehead. So the difference here is, what do I get? I get a more exact approximation of what the subject is. What do I lose? A little bit of ease. I think the difficulty goes up. It's a little bit harder to work with this or think about the egg turning. So every time I go up in difficulty, I get a more direct result, but I also have a less forgiving shape to be working with. The other thing we could notice as far as this one goes, the egg shape, is it's pretty noticeable from profile. Just one more thought on that. So if we were to look at the skull in the profile view as I have it set up here for you, the basic egg shape would always sit like this, and it has a natural tilt to it. So your skull wouldn't normally be kind of horizontal and vertical. I mean, another benefit to using or maybe thinking with this shape would be that you get that more natural gesture to the weight and balance of the cranial mass and its positioning. Additional benefits, the list never ends, could be that likeness can begin early on at the stage of the skull. So in terms of likeness here, we can look and see stereotypically that there is a difference between men and women in the lean of the forehead. So if you're using an egg kind of early on like I am here, you can start to notice that different tilt. Men tend to be more diagonal in that tilt or lean, and then women tend to favor stereotypically more of a vertical in the forehead. A third option, and this will be relatively quick, is this can be something that you use for customization and character. So there's no reason that you have to begin with a shape that emulates the direct kind of look of the skull. You could lean into the idea of archetype, right? I could have, a head shape that's more of a square, and maybe this is suited or more suited to a character that is stubborn or solid or some kind of soldier, or maybe I lean into a shape that's a little bit more exaggerated, right, in terms of the iconic look or feel of traditional characters. Maybe a longer, thinner rectangle feels more elegant and might be more appropriate for a wealthier class. What I'm actually envisioning in my head, one of my favorite video games, Dishonored, the soldiers are these kind of squared heads and faces, and then the aristocratic class are these kind of taller, leaner rectangles, and then there's this kind of class of people in the game that are sick and kind of populate the city streets, and their head shapes are kind of distorted and leaned. And so that's the way you can think about modifying this really early stage to produce a lot of range in terms of how you want to take this. So that's step one. That gives you your cranial mass and shape. So a lot to think about there, but you could really just choose any one of those options and then move on from there. So the reason that I go through are always just things that I knew I did wrong. And I needed something that was foolproof to make sure I didn't continue to repeat and make the same mistakes consistently. So the reason that I would set a step for tilts is that early on in most, if not all, of my head drawings, and still some in the present, I would end up, because of such an early interest and emphasis on features, producing a head that was completely vertical, sitting on top of a neck that was completely vertical, sitting on top of shoulders that are completely horizontal. And I would, at times have gray eyes, but they lived on a face or a person that looked like they had constant whiplash. There was no motion of their neck or shoulder or head. And so it became very anti-expressive. So if we take those, let's call them tilts. Tilt, again, I just mean a two-dimensional lean or axes. And we could just think of this as the side-to-side lean of the head, neck, and shoulder. But there's a lot of expression here. So let's say 1, 2, 3. So this would be kind of engaging or really trying to connect with the nonverbal elements of your figure, or what are the stories that we transmit and communicate without language. So that's kind of how I would think about what gesture is or how we could define it. And with shoulders, head, and neck, right, there's a massive amount of emotion that we can transmit here. And it doesn't have to be that you exaggerate these, but one example of this stage put in context with the egg that we have so far, or the ball, is just that once I have this ball, right, then I'll come on top with a 2D axes and just try to cite what the lean is. So maybe the head leans to the right, maybe the neck leans back, and then maybe the shoulder line leans diagonal again. So if you were a portrait artist in the 17th century, like Sir Joshua Reynolds or Gainsborough, you would have used this configuration of tilts to indicate that your sitter is arrogant. Right? Because portraiture in that period was not so much about copying what you see, but about having a sitter come in some kind of social event and then choosing and assigning different components for them and with them to produce the effect that they wanted, right? So the way that we see ourselves. This is also the way most people pose for selfies, right? So you have that top-down camera angle, and then just about every selfie I've seen has an offset axes or two-dimensional lean of head, neck, and shoulder. I'm not saying there's any connection as far as the emotion that's elicited, just that there's conventions, right? And it's good to start to think about how people move, why we position our shoulders and head the way we do. So this is something that helps my head drawing stay more dynamic. It accounts for the positionings of these specific areas, and then it can also elicit a lot of emotional appeal or impact on an audience. Okay, so that's done. Step 3. I'll start to introduce the jaw. So in this stage, we're going to put in a jaw. And then I'm also going to begin to reference what I'll call a T or a cross. I'll use those interchangeably. So let's do 4 little heads here. As far as the tilts, let's just make them all the same. Let's have those all be verticals, no dramatic leans. And then from here, I'm going to take, in this first one, let's have this one be a front view. I'm going to pull the jaw down with a couple of C curves off that initial sphere or ball and have that terminate at a straight line. So that's going to be my chin. So what am I looking for in order to do this in terms of the big relationships? Well, I still want the head to be the 2/3. And that would just be if you're trying to get this basic ideal model of a head construction, which is going to be my primary emphasis. Remember, you could change this to be, lean into character or lean into shape distortion if you like. So my average is going to be that 2/3 to 1/3. That's what I'm looking for in terms of just this basic proportion. The T, or the cross that I mentioned earlier, I'm going to look for that center line of the chin and then bring a line up that will be the symmetry line of the face. So that's going to split the face in half. You can see that it got pretty close to the tilt on this one. That doesn't have to be the case. I wasn't intending to do that. Sometimes it lines up close and that's great. Doesn't have to. The horizontal and the T or cross, I'm going to use to line up the eyebrow. So you can find those eyebrow and just kind of bring them across. And that gives me my center line and then a rough width for what the front of the face might be. Let's make this one 3/4. So what would happen in a 3/4 head? Well, we're just going to see this straight line of the chin start to shift and move towards one side. So let's do the same approach. We'll bring these lines down off the sphere. So one this way, and then this one might get a little bit longer because it's having to pull. And now my straight will be here. And now we have something, at least in terms of profile or silhouette, because we haven't developed anything on the inside of the face yet, that is facing 3/4 or suggestive of 3/4. What's going to happen with my cross now? So when I'm dealing with the cross in a 3/4 or profile view, I like to pull that straight around the forehead, and then it's going to break right when we get to the brow. So this is my brow line. And then the big difference that I want you to notice here is just that this center line or symmetry line is now hugging that right side of the face. And that's what's producing the feeling of that turn or that 3/4. You don't have to worry about these being precise. Usually my lines are really loose and sketchy, and I like that because it allows for me to make error along the way or come back and firm things up or refine later. So don't worry about this needing to be exact. So now let's say this view will be profile. So what I'm going to do in profile is the same. So my steps are always built the same way. There's my front plane. For profile, I'm going to take that chin away. So we don't have, in this case, that broader line. I just have a point. So now this would be indicating the turn of that jaw away from 3/4 front. And then I'm gonna have less here in terms of the center line, right? The center line in this would probably just be the outside of the shape. And then maybe I'll have half of what I normally would for that cross or that T there. And for this one, let's do back 3/4. So what we'll start with is the exact same shape as the front. So front 3/4. Let's do, so that way you don't have to remember more than one thing, which for me is always good. So let's say that's the exact same. You can notice the shapes are the same. The big difference here is going to be that there isn't a cross, right? So the cross would be like profile, or that center line might just be the outside of the face. So instead, for a back, I'm going to bring the jaw up. So let's do 1, 2 for the jaw. And now what we get is the back or underside of the mandible or the jaw, which we'll talk about later. And then here will be the base of the cranium. Right, in this part, you don't have to draw, you have to do what I'm doing for this, but the important lines would just be showing that the jaw comes in front of the skull. And then maybe drawing this other side here. And now you have spun the head 360 degrees. So there's really nothing else that you could do with the head in terms of rotation, except to create a gradation in between one of these views, like a little bit in between 3/4 in front or 3/4 in profile. But that's it, right? This is spinning the head all the way around in terms of a step that communicates rotation. So step 4, I only worry about perspective. Perspective here, I just mean, am I above or under? So let's do first under. So here's my ball, step 1. Here's my tilt, step 2. If somebody's, let's say if I'm underneath the head, somebody's probably leaning their head back and looking up. So that's why I have my tilt. Let's also include a neck here. And then let's do a shoulder line. So here's shoulder. What I also always like to do, and you could choose to leave this out, is give that neck a bit of a volume. So in the transition areas of the body, head, neck, torso, some muscles, it's always S or C is that transition part, pinching or stretching. So if the head's looking up, the back is going to pinch. And then the front of the neck would stretch. That looks more like an S to me. Okay, so with my giant basketball head, that's my tilt. Now I'm going to do step 3. Which is, I'm going to make it 3/4. So here's the front plane of the face. And just like we did this line up here. The only difference now is that has to match my tilt. So the tilt is signing for that two-dimensional lean, but it's also a reminder to me for the steps that will come next that I have to keep consistent. The big change that you're going to get when you start doing poses that are from below is that you're going to see a shift in this proportion. So you're not always going to have that really clean 2/3, 1/3. In a pose like this, you're going to have to subtract that jaw shape. So I might, in this one, need to move that chin up and into the skull. So that's here. In these, or in circumstances like these, I like to do a little bit of that underplane for the jaw. So here's where I think my chin is. Next, let's make my cross. Here's the center line. And then where's my brow? Well, when we look up, usually the brow moves closer towards the top of the head. So that would be here. So that's all steps included. So what am I missing? Well, how am I going to indicate for perspective? Perspective at this point is just an ellipse for me. It's just one ellipse that indicates for that big position. And the way that I find it, so let's write that. So here's this stage is ellipse, that I'm looking from the brow to the top of the ear. So this is very much inspired and indebted to Andrew Loomis. I mix in a lot of my teacher, John Watkiss, Glenn Villepeu, a big kind of stew of different approaches to head drawing mixed together, which I think is one of the best ways to put together your own approach. So one thing that I'll look for again at this stage is brow, and then where's my ear? So one concrete way to think of this might be to think about how glasses look on somebody when they look up or down. And so you could imagine these are my glasses I went to school for 20 years for. To draw that well. So the glasses would go across, right, that area of the brow, and then they're going to start to drop down to the ear in a view where somebody is looking up. So you could keep that in mind. That would be a good indication that you're going to be underneath. And then what I'm trying to match here in terms of an ellipse is really a summary for the position of a cylinder. Right, so imagine that this cylinder here, right, this is the effect that we're looking to get, where I get a little bit of this underplane, but I don't want to draw the whole cylinder, so I'm just trying to set up what would be a cross contour or a volumetric contour, aiming through the brow to the ear. So let's find our brow to ear, and let's just start to swing through that ball, a big ellipse. So that looks pretty good to me, and then I'll just firm up or darken what would be forward or closer to me. Again, it could be loose, scratchy, it doesn't have to be dialed in. You're going to build over this. This is, again, your gestural stage to the head drawing process. So one thing I've seen students do quite a bit that gets them into trouble with this stage specifically, the perspective ellipse of brow to ear, and Loomis shows this in his book or discusses it too, is that this ellipse when drawn needs to stay at the equatorial center, which sounds totally bizarre and foreign. So just try to imagine that this is the equator line of the Earth. And so when I'm drawing this, I know that it doesn't look like this line right here is at the center of anything because it's higher up on the sphere, right? It's way closer to this than it is down. There's nothing centered about that. So what I'm thinking instead, or what I want you to think about is, you can put any ellipse you want in this sphere to create that perspective view, but the major axis has to be at the center. So the major axis is that through line of the ellipse. So you'd have the major axis is the width of the ellipse, the minor axis is the height, the top to the bottom. So this is what needs to say center. So like in my example, I can have a ball or a skull that's like that, and then still work my ellipse through the brow to the ear. And even though this line's really high, my double check for placement will be that major axis. The reason that's important for later is that the brow, or that line, that perspective line, is to the chin my most important marker for proportion. So if you have a starting shape for your skull and that ellipse is kind of like a little higher or wobbles and is a little bit lower, then it's going to impact the later proportion of your face. So I'm hedging a little bit just because I've seen that mistake a lot, but hopefully I can save you some heartbreak and some frustration by pointing it out a little bit early. What you'll notice here in the chin to the jaw is that I'm just trying to replicate what the bottom of a cylinder would look like. So I'm trying to do that there. For the above view, let's just do the same thing. Sphere, tilt, maybe we'll bow the head. So maybe we'll lean the tilt line forward. We could put a neck in there and shoulder, maybe shoulders behind a little bit. And then when I start to create the third step, which would be the front of the face, remember that's going to parallel my tilt. The reason I have to think about that is sometimes you'll do one step and lean the head, and then if you're not aware or conscious of it, you'll start drawing the jaw back like the whiplash guy above, right? So we just have this need or this constant, at least I do, I'm not going to speak for everybody, habit of wanting to make things vertical or static or stable. So having these steps kind of hanging out in the drawing as it progresses is a nice little reminder for me. So that's going to line up. Now let's do 3/4 again. So here's my chin. In a really extreme view for this, a foreshortened view, maybe you could have that 2/3, 1/3 start to dissolve also and maybe hide behind the skull. Then we did our stretch and pinch. Let's do that here. But for a view that's looking down, maybe the gesture of the neck gets longer and more S-like. And then the front of the neck would be more of a pinch. So there's my neck. In a view like this, we would see, where's our center? So it's 3/4 again. That comes down. Parallel again to the tilt in the front of the face. Maybe I'm seeing the cross. This is my preliminary setup for the brow here. Where's the ear? Ear is going to be higher. So it's the opposite example of the first. Think glasses again. Brow would drop, frame would go up. That gives me kind of points through which I could begin to look for my ellipse. Here's my ellipse. I'm going to darken what I would see on the front, even though I'm drawing all the way through. And then my triple check would be, is this major axis halfway? And looks close enough, right? And you don't always have to go through this, but if you find that your heads look a little warped in the proportion, this might be a good place to come back and just double check. I can't think of anything else that you could do to a head besides these 4 steps, right? The perspective would be the last, putting the camera under or over. But from this, I don't think there's anything else you could really even worry about. And at step 1, I probably gave you too much to worry about, but you could see how each one of these steps could also apply to something that's really rudimentary and character driven like that.